Victor Langston's voice echoed through the hallway as I walked past the executive conference room. Innovation comes from youth. He gossiped loud, confident, almost theatrical, like he was delivering a TED Talk to a room full of people paid to agree with him. I didn't slow down. I never did anymore. I'd heard it all before. Heard it at my wedding. Actually, when he raised a glass to my husband for choosing wisely. Then turned to me with a smile and thanked me for keeping the catering under budget. If you've ever been in a place where your efforts weren't recognized, please like this video. I'm also curious, where did you hear that from, and what was the temperature like there? Now, let me take you back in time. That was 3 years ago. 3 years of 14-hour days, weekend logins, late-night supplier calls across time zones. 3 years of holding together this family-owned chaos with nothing but contracts, relationships, and caffeine. And it wasn't even my family. Not really. I was just the daughter-in-law. And in Victor Langston's world, that translated to something like an unpaid intern, just with better clothes. Want the truth? Nepotism didn't help me. It buried me. Victor loved the optics, keeping me low enough to look humble, while handing opportunities to outsiders so he could play the role of the fair, visionary leader. He called it balance. I called it humiliation with a salary. I built the logistics pipeline from scratch, negotiated exclusivity deals with suppliers who hadn't returned Victor's calls in years, turned a department that once ran on messy spreadsheets and crossed fingers into a machine that delivered over 20% profit growth year after year. No applause, no recognition. Half the company didn't even know my name. I'm pretty sure some still thought I was Melissa or Megan. The only time I saw Maribel Carter in an internal memo was when I canceled a VP's Napa trip after he tried to expense a couple's massage. That same VP once asked if I worked under the receptionist. I manage 5 departments, but sure, tell me how you take your coffee. And the big pitch last quarter, 48 pages of strategy, 7 months of preparation, a full system rollout. The client sent a gift basket addressed to me. Victor kept the chocolates and forwarded me a blurry photo of the thank you card, thumbs up emoji included. Still, I stayed, because some part of me believed that if I worked hard enough, if I became undeniable merit, would eventually win over bloodlines. I'd like to note that this is a fictional story, with some elements enhanced by artificial intelligence to make it more vivid, deepen the emotional experience, and convey meaningful messages. So sit back, relax, and keep listening. I didn't start documenting everything out of paranoia. Not at first. It was slower than that. Subtle. The kind of habit that grows when you realize being right isn't enough. You have to be able to prove it later. It began with small things. Saving email threads instead of letting them disappear into archives. Downloading signed contracts instead of trusting shared drives. Keeping copies of vendor conversations. Timestamps. Approvals, every decision that somehow always seemed to lose my name by the time it reached upper management. I told myself it was just good practice. Organization. Professional discipline. But deep down, I knew better. I'd seen too many ideas get reassigned. Too many wins get redirected. Too many team efforts that somehow excluded the person who actually built the system holding it all together. So I started keeping records the way someone keeps insurance policies quietly, consistently, just in case. Invoices, contracts, renewal clauses, access logs, everything. That's how I found myself staring at one particular agreement late one night, long after the office had emptied and the cleaning crew had finished their rounds. A supplier renewal packet I had personally negotiated the previous fiscal year. Buried deep in the legal language, past the standard clauses no one reads twice, was something I had insisted on adding. A single provision, at the time. The company lawyer had paused, eyebrows raised, asking if I was sure, said it was unusual. I smiled and told her it was necessary. The clause designated me specifically, by name as the exclusive liaison for that vendor relationship through the end of the contract term. Any transition would require formal notice and external approval. It looked like a minor detail. It wasn't. Because sometimes, the only way to protect your work is to make sure it can't quietly exist without you. The shift didn't happen overnight. It started with a lunch I wasn't invited to. Victor had been in an unusually good mood that week, whistling off key, walking around like he had just closed a deal no one else knew about. At dinner, my husband mentioned it casually. Dad met up with his old golf partner, Daniel Reeves. Apparently his son just graduated. Marketing degree. Might come in for an internship. I nodded, cutting into my food like it had personally offended me. That's nice. A week later, Cole Reeves walked in. You could spot him instantly. Too polished. Too confident for someone who hadn't earned it yet. Bright smile, firm handshake, shoes that looked like they'd never touched real pavement. The kind of presence that made people straighten up, not out of respect, but out of reflex. Victor gave him a personal tour of the entire office. Personally, I had been there 3 years and still didn't have a designated parking spot. Cole's desk was set up 2 rows from mine by the end of day 1. Dual monitors, window seat, brand new equipment still in plastic wrap. Meanwhile, I was still using the laptop I bought myself because budgets were tight. By day 3, he stopped by my desk. Hey, do you know how I can access the project drive, he asked. Casual, like he was asking for Wi-Fi at a cafe. I'll have IT onboard you, I said, smiling politely. You might want to start with the supplier contracts, especially North Axis. It's more complex than it looks. He blinked. North Axis. I tapped my temple lightly. That's where most of the real work lives. What I didn't say was this: you won't understand it. Not without me. But that wasn't the point anymore. The point was how quickly things were shifting around him. People stopping by his desk. Managers suddenly looping him into conversations that had nothing to do with his role. Victor mentioning his name in meetings like it carried weight. It didn't take long for the pattern to become obvious. This wasn't an internship. This was positioning. And for the first time in 3 years, I stopped wondering if I was being overlooked and started realizing I was being replaced. The rumors started quietly, the way dangerous ideas always do. A half-heard conversation in the copy room, a forwarded email that wasn't meant for me, a subject line from the CFO's assistant that read Expansion Initiative, early draft. At first, I ignored it. I had deadlines, vendor calls, systems to maintain, but then the details started lining up a little too perfectly. High-volume logistics optimization, streamlined vendor integration, a centralized dashboard architecture. It wasn't just similar to something I had been working on. It was exactly what I had been building. For months, I had been sketching out a scalable model during late nights and quiet weekends, testing frameworks, refining supplier engagement strategies, building projections that actually worked in real conditions, not just on presentation slides. My team had already prototyped a module that reduced lead times significantly. We weren't just ready. We were ahead. This wasn't just another internal update. This was the project. The kind that defines careers. The kind that gets your name remembered. And I built it. One evening, while I was heating up leftovers and trying to convince myself that exhaustion counted as productivity. My husband walked in, smiling like he had good news. Dad's been talking about the new logistics expansion. He said, he's impressed. Said you laid the entire foundation. Sounds like he's finally going to put you in charge. I didn't answer right away. Just took a slow sip of my drink, letting the words settle. I had heard this story before. Different project. Same promise. You don't sound excited, he added. I am, I said carefully. I'm just waiting. Because hope, at that point, felt less like optimism and more like a trap I kept walking into willingly. Still, I couldn't stop it entirely. Somewhere in the back of my mind, a small voice whispered, maybe this time is different. Maybe this time, the work actually matters. But experience has a way of speaking louder than hope, and mine was already telling me not to believe it just yet. The next morning, I came in earlier than usual, before the lights fully warmed up, before the office noise filled the air. I cleared my inbox, tightened my reports, and sent Victor a clean summary of projections, sharp, precise, impossible to ignore. His reply came 10 minutes later, a single thumbs up. I told myself that was something. Progress. Maybe. Then later that afternoon, I saw them. Across the street, through the cafe window, Victor sitting at a small round table, leaning forward, animated. Across from him was Daniel Reeves and Cole. Cole was nodding like he understood every word, like he belonged in that conversation. Victor was gesturing with both hands, explaining something with the kind of enthusiasm I hadn't seen directed at me in years. I stood there longer than I should have, iced coffee sweating in my hand, pretending I was just another passerby. But I knew what I was looking at. That wasn't a casual lunch. That was strategy. My strategy. Back at the office, Cole had a sticky note on his monitor. Call North Axis. Ask about contract terms. I stared at it for a moment longer than necessary, then turned away. Not because I didn't understand what it meant, but because I understood it too well. He didn't know what he was doing. Not really. He didn't understand the structure, the dependencies, the risks buried in those agreements. But that didn't seem to matter, because he wasn't being asked to build anything. He was being positioned to present it. And I kept working. Scheduled meetings, finalized vendor alignment plans, cleaned up documentation, built out timelines that could survive real-world pressure, not just executive summaries. I even saved copies of everything in a private folder, labeled simply, just in case. By the end of the week, the company-wide email went out. Exciting expansion ahead. Corporate language, polished, vague. But the message was clear. Something big was coming, and everyone around me started saying the same thing. This has your name written all over it. I smiled when they said it, nodded like I believed it too. But that feeling, the one I couldn't shake it, was getting louder. Because I had seen this pattern before, and this time, it didn't feel like anticipation. It felt like a setup. They brought in catering. That was the first sign. Victor didn't spend money on pastries unless he was trying to soften something or distract from it. The last time there were neatly arranged trays in the conference room. An entire department got restructured out of existence before lunch. So when I walked in and saw bagels, fruit platters, and coffee lined up like a celebration, I already knew this wasn't going to be good. The room filled quickly. Department heads, managers, analysts, even the interns. Everyone took their usual places. The quiet buzz of anticipation hanging in the air. I sat where I always did, left side. Midway down the table, close enough to matter, far enough to be ignored. Victor walked in last. Of course he did, and Cole was right behind him. Blazer slightly stiff, posture a little too rehearsed, carrying a laptop like it was a prop. I noticed the small details, the nervous shift in his stance, the way he kept glancing at Victor for cues. Victor didn't look at me, not once. Team, he began, smiling that polished, practiced smile. As you all know, we're entering an exciting new phase of growth. The screen behind him lit up. Project Elevate, my project. He talked about vision, innovation, fresh perspectives. Every word carefully chosen to sound impressive while saying nothing real. And then he paused, just long enough to make sure everyone was paying attention. That's why I'm thrilled to announce, there it was, that Cole Reeves will be leading Project Elevate as our interim strategic innovation lead. Silence, not the comfortable kind, the kind that pulls the air out of a room, the kind where people stop breathing for a second because their brains are trying to catch up with what they just heard. Cole stood up awkwardly, said something about being honored, about learning, about leading. I clapped. 3 soft, polite claps, just enough to signal I understood the performance. The rest of the room followed, unsure, hesitant. Victor still didn't say my name, not once, not when he described the foundation of the project, not when he talked about the systems already in place, not even a passing acknowledgement. 3 years of work, erased in under 30 seconds. And in that moment, sitting there with a smile still on my face, I realized something very clearly. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was intentional. If you think the CEO was right to give the project to someone with less experience simply because they wanted a fresh perspective, you can comment in support. But if you believe that years of hard work being ignored is unfair, don't stay silent. Right, I disagree. Sometimes, the quietest voices in the room contain the biggest truths. I didn't react the way they probably expected. No confrontation, no dramatic exit. I just walked back to my desk, opened my inbox, and kept working like nothing had happened. Because sometimes, the strongest move isn't noise, it's silence. 2 hours later, Cole showed up. He was holding a printed contract, slightly crumpled at the edges. "Hey, Maribel, quick question," he said, forcing a smile. "This North Axis agreement, do you have the original file? I'm not totally clear on the renewal terms." I looked at him for a moment. Not with anger, not even frustration, just clarity. "That's not my responsibility anymore," I said calmly. He blinked, confused, like the script had suddenly changed and no one told him. I stood up and walked away before he could ask anything else. Victor's office door was half open when I got there. He was on the phone, talking in that polished tone he used when he wanted to sound in control. I didn't wait. I stepped inside, placed the envelope on his desk, and waited. He finished the call, glanced at me, then at the paper. "What's this, my resignation?" I said, 2 weeks' notice. The shift in his expression was almost immediate. Surprise first, then irritation. "You're being emotional," he said. "No," I replied evenly. "I'm being precise." He leaned back, studying me like he was trying to figure out what he had missed. "I'll transition everything properly," I continued, "though some areas may require legal clearance, especially vendor contracts." His eyes narrowed slightly. That was the moment he realized. This wasn't just me leaving. I didn't make a scene on my last day. No farewell email, no speeches. I packed my things the same way I had worked for 3 years, quietly, methodically, leaving everything in order, except the parts that couldn't exist without me. Folders were labeled, notes were clean, timelines were documented, but certain files remained just out of reach, locked behind processes no one had ever bothered to understand. Before I walked out, I sent one final email, not to Victor, not to the company, to North Axis. Subject line, Notice of Liaison Transition, Clause Activation, short, professional, binding. By the time I stepped into the elevator, it was already in motion. The first crack showed up 2 days later. A former colleague forwarded me a message. Procurement couldn't process a shipment. North Axis had declined the request, unauthorized contact. By the end of the week, it escalated, orders delayed, approvals stuck, vendor responses slowing to a crawl. What used to take hours was now taking days. Cole tried to fix it. Of course he did. He started emailing every contact he could find, copying half the company, asking for updates he didn't understand. Most of those emails went unanswered. The few replies he got all said the same thing in different words per contract terms. "We cannot proceed." Then came the internal chaos. Meetings stacked on meetings, finance questioning numbers that no longer added up, operations scrambling to explain delays they couldn't control. The system wasn't broken. It was functioning exactly as designed. It just wasn't designed to run without me. I heard Cole had started forwarding requests with "please advise" in the subject line, that he was trying to rebuild workflows from scratch while still pretending everything was under control. But control was already gone. And for the first time in 3 years, I wasn't the one holding everything together. The refusals didn't stop with North Axis. Within days, other vendors started pushing back too. Fulcrum Dynamics flagged a clause buried deep in their agreement, one that waived penalty fees only under my direct oversight, without me attached to the implementation. Those protections disappeared. Costs spiked almost overnight. Budgets that once looked efficient suddenly made no sense. Timelines slipped, deadlines were missed, and the more they tried to fix it, the worse it became. Project Elevate, the same project they had celebrated with catered pastries, was bleeding before it even launched. I didn't need insider access to know what was happening. The updates found me anyway. Screenshots, messages, frantic voice notes from people still inside, trying to make sense of a system that had quietly depended on one person they had overlooked. Then came the client calls. One of the project partners asked about licensing rights during a meeting. Cole hesitated, tried to answer, failed. The silence that followed was louder than anything he could have said, because for the first time, it wasn't just internal confusion. Clients were starting to notice. Questions turned into doubts. Doubts turned into hesitation. And hesitation, in business, is just a slower version of walking away. Victor tried to contain it, blamed suppliers, blamed legal, blamed growing pains. But panic doesn't hide well. Not when numbers start slipping, not when calls go unanswered, not when the people who used to trust you begin asking for reassurance you can't give. I heard he had started calling emergency meetings, that his tone had changed from confident to controlled, from controlled to defensive. Because this wasn't a small disruption. This was structural, the kind of failure that doesn't explode all at once, but spreads quietly until everything starts coming apart. I didn't rush into anything after I left. I took a week to breathe, to reset, and then I registered my consulting firm. The first call came faster than I expected. Then another, and another. Clients didn't ask about the company. They asked about me, within a month. I was working directly with partners I used to manage under Victor's name. Only now, the contracts had mine on them. Clean, independent, final. One of the largest clients accounting for a significant portion of Hale and Rowe's revenue terminated their agreement, not abruptly, professionally, quietly, and signed with me instead. That's when the numbers started collapsing for real. Revenue dipped, projects stalled, confidence cracked. Then Victor called, not as a CEO, not as family, as someone who needed help. His voice was different, measured, careful. He asked if I'd consider coming back, just temporarily, to stabilize things. I let him finish. Then I quoted my rate, triple my old salary, retainer up front, full control over vendor strategy. Silence. Then a quiet agreement, because in the end, this wasn't revenge, it was value, and for the first time, he finally understood mine. For a long time, I thought being patient and working harder would eventually fix everything. But the truth is, respect isn't something you wait for, it's something you define for yourself. Looking back, this experience didn't just change my career, it changed the way I see my own value. I walked away with 5 lessons I'll never forget. First, hard work alone is not enough if the right people refuse to see it. Second, always document your contributions. Your work deserves proof, not just memory. Third, never confuse loyalty with self-sacrifice. Staying in the wrong place too long can cost you more than leaving. Fourth, real power comes from knowledge and ownership, not titles or recognition. And finally, sometimes walking away isn't losing, it's the moment you start winning on your own terms. What about you? Which lesson hit you the hardest? I'd really love to hear your thoughts. Share it in the comments, because your perspective might be exactly what someone else in this community needs to hear. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. It helps the channel grow and lets us keep bringing you more meaningful and engaging stories like this.